Siobhan, you're acting CEO of Tourism Ireland until Niall comes back in September. We're halfway through the year. What's your feeling for how the year is progressing?
I think it's progressing well. I think it's very different to where we thought we'd be at this time, and maybe this time last year or even 6 months ago. Demand is very strong. We're seeing all markets, all of the established markets have recovered well. And we're seeing lots and lots of overseas visitors in Ireland this summer. That's coming with its own bother, because we probably weren't quite ready for that level of demand, and there's some issues on the supply side, but looking really good. And demand for Ireland in particular is very strong, and I think it's well told at this stage. But there's three things. There's that pent up demand, there's those deferred bookings, and there's the savings people have built up, which are all giving us that very good summer this year.
Yeah, and are you seeing that strong demand from all markets, or are some performing better than others?
I think the US is performing very strongly. GB is performing well, but kind of where we thought it would be. And then mainland Europe is performing as well, kind of steadily to where we thought it was. But the US being the one that's probably exceeding where we thought we'd be. A lot of that linked to the air access. We're back to 96% of the seats we had in summer 2019 from the US, which makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and also I think the dollar is strong, isn't it? So kind of the value that the US visitor is getting is that bit more. And the US market is I mean, let's talk about that for a second. It's so important to Irish tourism because they spend longer here, they tour the regions, they're really good tourists. What's the mood like in the States? Because we hear about interest rates and about inflation, and obviously there's kind of political, challenges in the States. Is the US market still positively disposed to Ireland?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of optimism in the US. When we go looking and asking the questions, they're keen to travel. Nothing's going to stop them traveling. An unusual thing, I think those of us who've been around a while would have thought that what's happening in Ukraine would probably mute a demand from the US, but no evidence of that now. Is that it's still as strong and looking good to 2023 as well. I think the only difficulty we're hearing from the US operators is that we can't give them the supply to match the demand this summer. But looking good out to over the autumn. In fact, over the winter this year, we'll have more access, more direct seat capacity than we had from North America than we had over winter 2019. We've opened our San Francisco office. That's brought a lot of new opportunity in California and along the West Coast. And
is that the first time you've had a footprint on that coast?
It's the first time we've had, we had a rep there years ago, but it's the first time we've actually had a full serviced office. So Bob Wood is leading that, and now we've three others working with her in San Francisco.
Great. And of course, I suppose one of the good things about COVID, if we can say anything was good about COVID, but one of the good things was the sort of increased investment the government put behind tourism. And it did mean, I think, a doubling of Tourism Ireland's overseas marketing budgets for this current year. How have you spent that? I presume when you talk about opening a San Francisco office, it means you're able to do more things in a bigger, better way.
Yeah, I think it varied by market area, but across, say, in the US, we would have previously had maybe 2 bursts of TV during the year. This year, we'll have 4 bursts of TV, and we're doing that in 9 markets with direct access. So it's a really wide campaign that will reach more than double what we'd have reached in 2019. In Britain, then, again, we'll have 5 bursts of TV advertising in GB, but it also brought big things in, like we were able to sponsor Derry Girls. So that was a huge boost for us because it was the most watched TV program.
Yeah, great sponsorship.
Yeah, and it does really let us link into things like that. So it brings a lot of new additional opportunities that we wouldn't have before. And then in mainland Europe, I think when you look at Germany and France, again, they'll have had multiple bursts of TV this year. But when you get down to Spain, Italy, the Nordics and the Netherlands, an investment of an extra $500,000 in those kind of markets just brings you into a completely different media plan. So they, as well as digitals, they have connected TV, they have outdoor advertising, and particularly I think we're seeing the impact there in terms of the visibility of the campaigns. It also allowed us invest a lot more with partners. And I think one of the things that's been particularly good is the industry market access program, where we paid the cost for the industry to come overseas. We've had 177 industry avail of that so far this year, which has been great because having those boots on the ground, in addition to what we do, just really makes that difference about Ireland being open and Ireland being welcoming.
Yeah, and so important when there was 2 years of, if you like, non-market activity. You mentioned at the outset about, demand increasing probably at a quicker pace than any of us had expected, and there being supply challenges, particularly on the ground here in Ireland. So we all know about, the difficulties that Dublin Airport has had and continues to have to a certain extent. There's an acute accommodation shortage. There's stories about car hire prices. The Lonely Planet came out recently with a kind of quite a critical piece on Dublin. Are you seeing, I mean, we're obviously all worried about that and we're very conscious about it, but are you seeing any evidence that overseas in the markets that is permeating into public consciousness?
Not quite yet. I think it's certainly been spoken about in the travel trade and in the travel media, but every country is having similar difficulties. So it's a tricky one. It's certainly unhelpful, and we'd certainly be concerned and worried about it, because anything that impacts your word of mouth isn't good. But last week, less than 2% of our engagements in social media were negative commentary about pricing or Dublin Airport. So, it is quite contained at the moment. But that said, there's plenty of other news in the news media cycle at the moment that people aren't looking for stories. So definitely unhelpful, and we definitely like to see improvements. If people go looking to travel to Ireland this year and it's not possible because of high prices, the worry is they don't look again when prices will moderate in the next few months.
Absolutely, yeah. You carried out, for the last couple of years, I think it was called a COVID tracker in overseas markets. I'm not sure if it's still a COVID tracker, but are you still active in terms of the research kind of analytics side overseas? And if you are, what's that telling you at the moment?
Yeah, so the COVID tracker then became the Ukraine cost of living COVID tracker. It's looking at everything now. And what I'm telling you is that people do want to travel. Still, people do want to holiday. But certainly we're starting to see more concern about pricing and cost of living. And we hope to do it again now in the next month or two, which I suspect will focus more on cost of living, because certainly from October onwards, we have definite concerns that I think are shared by the industry about when people start having to pay the fuel bill or start seeing those increased prices, will they take the second or third holiday? And over the winter months, that's what we compete for in Europe and in Britain, is for people taking additional holidays. So definitely we're seeing cost of living creeping up as a bigger concern, and COVID is lesser concern. But then again, I think we all know we're not quite sure what happened with COVID over the winter this year.
But it's an interesting point. Like, the summer will be busy for, as you mentioned, pent-up demand, deferred bookings, all that sort of stuff. But as we go into autumn, winter, and indeed into next year, it's much less certain, isn't it? I mean, certainly we in the industry would say we have to keep stimulating demand and keep generating awareness of Ireland as a holiday destination, into next year and beyond, because this is an artificial year in many ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think the idea of there would be one restart year and then we'd go on a growth curve isn't going to prove to be true. Certainly this year could prove to be a bit of a false dawn as those kind of three factors came into play, and next year is the more realistic restart year. And certainly, retaining that kind of marketing investment will be needed because it's an ever more competitive environment. I think what we found over COVID was every government in the world discovered how important tourism was, and we're very fortunate in that we operate with governments who are always pro-tourism and always very favourable for tourism. But a lot of governments who weren't, once they had no visitors in the country, discovered the impact of that. So it's a very competitive international environment now. So we'd be looking to see to spend again next year, because 2023. It's looking worrying at the moment, but then bookings are coming in very last minute. I think one thing about this summer is we're still getting bookings in Germany. Usually you could call Germany at the end of January almost to the nearest 1,000 visitors, but they're just booking later as well.
And of course we always say it, but tourism is so vulnerable to external shocks. So we had COVID, and COVID is still lingering around as we know, unfortunately. But Brexit hasn't gone away either, has it? And, obviously Tourism Ireland being an Island of Ireland agency, that whole north-south, that whole, issue about, the Northern Ireland Protocol and it does have an impact, or potentially an impact, on tourism that we have to be very mindful of.
Yeah, we're actually working on a Brexit impact paper at the moment, because there's a few things. There's There's the passport ID card issue, which seems largely to be solved now, but not very clearly so. With the Nationalities and Borders Bill making its way through Westminster at the minute, which would mean people would have to almost get the ETA, a visa, to go from south to north, which makes it difficult. But I think also we've got things like our last bit of research showed that, you know, not everyone in Europe is entirely clear that Ireland isn't part of the UK, and that perception still exists. And within GB, they're not fully aware of the common travel area. So I think it'll be important for us next year to do a lot of work around the common travel area and ease of travel. And you know, Ireland is the place you can go. And sure, Northern Ireland, of course, been in the domestic market for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Siobhan, well done on all the hard work this year. You've got a lot on your plate. We're certainly going to be campaigning for maintenance of the Tourism Ireland money into next year, because I think we'll need it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Siobhan.